There is a house in Iowa that has never stopped screaming. You can't hear it, not at first, but the moment you learn what happened inside those walls on a warm June night in 1912, you will never be able to unhear it. And here's the part that should terrify you the most. Whoever did it walked away. They were never caught. They may have lived a long, comfortable life. They may have died peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by family, while the bodies of 8 innocent people rotted in the ground. And the house is still standing today, waiting for you to walk through its front door. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. And I promise you, by the time this story is over, you will be afraid of the dark in a way you have never been before. Villisca, Iowa. Population a little over 2,000 people. In the early 1900s, this was the kind of town that felt like a dream. Children played outside until the fireflies came out. Neighbors left their doors unlocked at night without a second thought. The kind of place where everyone knew your name. Everyone watched out for each other. And nobody, not a single person, expected anything bad to ever happen to them. It was warm. It was safe. It was innocent. It was exactly the kind of town a monster would love. The Moore family was the heart of that town. Josiah Moore was a successful businessman who ran a local implement store. He was respected. He was well liked. He was the kind of man that people trusted without question. His wife Sarah was warm, devoted, and deeply involved in the local church community. They had 4 children: Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul, ages ranging from 5 to 11 years old. They were a good family, a normal family, a family that had Sunday dinners together, that laughed at the dinner table, that prayed together before bed. The kind of family that had absolutely no reason to believe that June 9, 1912 would be the last night any of them would ever breathe. That evening, the Moores attended a Children's Day program at their local Presbyterian church. It was a happy night, a community night. The children performed. Parents clapped. Josiah shook hands with neighbors and smiled that easy, familiar smile of his. Sarah chatted with friends after the program ended, and 2 young girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, ages 12 and 8, were invited back to spend the night at the Moore home, a sleepover. An innocent, ordinary sleepover that would become one of the most heartbreaking decisions ever made in that town, because those 2 little girls would never see their parents again. They all walked home together under the Iowa summer sky. They tucked into their beds. The lights went out one by one. The house settled into silence. And then nothing. Just the sound of a quiet town going to sleep, completely unaware that something unspeakable was already moving in the dark. Nobody heard anything that night. Not a single neighbor. Not a single passerby. That is what makes this case so deeply, so profoundly unsettling. 8 people, a husband, a wife, 4 children, and 2 young girls were murdered in their sleep. And not one person on that street reported hearing a scream, not a cry, not the sound of a struggle, not a crash, nothing, just silence. Which tells you one of 2 things. Either this entire town slept so deeply that night that nothing could have woken them, or whoever held that axe was so controlled, so precise, so disturbingly calm, that they moved through that house like a shadow, like they had done this before, like they were not afraid of making a mistake. The bodies were discovered the next morning by a neighbor named Mary Peckham. She had noticed something wrong before she even knocked on the door. The house was too quiet. Josiah's chickens had not been fed. The curtains were still drawn. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door. Locked. A cold feeling crept through her that she could not explain. She called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. He arrived with a spare key. He put it in the lock. He turned the handle, and what he found on the other side of that door would haunt him for every single remaining day of his life. Every victim had been bludgeoned to death with an axe while they slept. The wounds were severe. The attack had been powerful and deliberate. But here is what made the scene feel like something out of a nightmare, rather than a simple act of violence. Every single body had been carefully covered, bedsheets pulled up, clothing draped over faces, as if the killer, after committing these murders, had walked back through each room and tucked the dead in. The mirrors throughout the house had been covered as well with clothing, with sheets, with whatever was within reach. A piece of raw bacon sat on the kitchen floor with no explanation. A kerosene lamp had been moved from its normal position and repositioned in a way that suggested it had been carried from room to room through the darkness. And in the kitchen, a bowl of bloody water. Someone had used it to wash their hands, to clean the weapon. Something. but they had left it behind, sitting there on the counter, waiting to be found. Why cover the mirrors? Why cover the faces of the dead? Why leave the bacon? Why stay long enough to wash up and then leave the evidence of that washing behind? These are not the actions of a panicked killer. These are the actions of someone operating according to their own internal logic, their own ritual, their own rules. And that more than the violence itself is what made investigators feel that they were dealing with something they had never seen before. The town of Villisca shattered overnight. Windows were locked for the first time in living memory. Men armed themselves. Mothers kept children indoors. The air in that town changed permanently, because the people of Villisca understood something on an instinctive level that they could barely put into words. This killer had walked among them, had attended their community events, had breathed the same air, and then had gone home and done something so terrible that the town would never fully recover. Investigators arrived from across the state, and the more they examined that crime scene, the more disturbed they became, because the Villisca murders did not look like a robbery gone wrong. Nothing of significant value had been taken from the house. It did not look like a personal grudge killing where someone had targeted one specific victim in a moment of rage. All 8 people had been attacked with the same calculated method, and it did not look like the work of someone who had acted impulsively. Every detail of that scene pointed toward planning, toward premeditation, toward a person who had thought this through in advance and executed it with chilling precision. The axe itself belonged to Josiah Moore. It was his own tool, stored on his own property, used against his own family. The killer had not brought a weapon from outside. They had used what was already there. Think about what that means. It means the killer either knew the layout of that property well enough to find the axe in the dark, or they had scouted it in advance. Either way, the implication is deeply disturbing. This person had some connection to that house, some familiarity with that family, or at the very least they had watched them long enough to know what they needed to know. The children's rooms were the hardest part of the crime scene for anyone to process. The Moore children had been killed in their beds without ever waking. There were no signs of struggle from the upstairs rooms, no overturned furniture, no bloody footprints leading away from a chase. The children had simply gone to sleep and never woken up, and the 2 Stillinger girls, sleeping downstairs in the guest room, are believed to have been killed first. Investigators concluded that the killer entered through a downstairs window and moved to the guest room before going upstairs. Lena Stillinger, the older of the 2 girls, 12 years old, may have briefly stirred. The positioning of her body, the angle of her injuries, suggested she may have tried to move, to roll away, to escape something she was only half conscious of feeling. She almost woke up. She almost survived. She came that close, and that single detail that she was almost awake, that she almost had a chance, is enough to break your heart completely and fill you with a quiet, devastating rage at whoever took that chance away from her. Now, here's where the story becomes even more complicated, because within days of the murders, suspects began to emerge, and every single one of them looked guilty, and every single one of them walked free. The first major suspect was a traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly. He had been present at the same church event as the Moores on the night of June 9th. He was seen in Villisca that evening, and he left town the very next morning on an early train before the bodies had even been discovered. When investigators tracked him down and questioned him, his alibi was full of holes. His behavior during interrogation was erratic and deeply strange. He rambled. He contradicted himself. He made statements that seemed to suggest knowledge of the crime scene that he should not have had. And then, in what became one of the most confusing and controversial moments in the entire investigation, he confessed. He told investigators he had done it. He described the murders. Then he took it back. Then months later, he confessed again. Then he took that back too. George Kelly was tried twice for the murders of the Stillinger girls. Both trials ended in hung juries. He was never convicted, and to this day, no one can say with certainty whether George Kelly was a calculating, cold-blooded killer or a deeply troubled, mentally unstable man who confessed to something he didn't do simply because some part of his fractured mind wanted the attention. But there was another suspect, one with far more motive and far more to lose. His name was Frank Jones. He was a prominent local businessman, wealthy, politically connected, and deeply respected in the community. He had once employed Josiah Moore at his company. The 2 men had worked together for years, and then something had gone wrong between them. A business dispute, a bitter falling out. Josiah had left Jones's company and started competing directly against him. Some investigators believe that Jones had never forgiven that betrayal, that he had hired a known criminal named William Mansfield to travel to Villisca and do what he himself could not. Jones was investigated. His connections to Mansfield were examined, but the political power he held in that region was significant, and charges were never filed. Frank Jones died without ever facing a courtroom for the Villisca murders. Whether he was guilty, or whether he was simply an easy villain for investigators desperate to find answers remains one of the most debated questions in the entire case. And then just when the investigation seemed like it could not become any more tangled, a new theory emerged. One that changed everything. Investigators began connecting the Villisca murders to a series of other axe murders that had occurred across the Midwest around the same period. Families killed in their sleep, mirrors covered, bodies arranged, lamps repositioned, the same signature, the same silence, the same disappearing killer. Was there a single person, a traveling killer moving through the American heartland, entering homes in the night and vanishing by morning? Some researchers have built entire careers around this theory. Others believe the connections are superficial, that investigators in desperate, unsolved cases naturally look for patterns that may not exist. The truth is, nobody knows, because nobody was ever convicted. And without a conviction, every theory remains exactly that, a theory, a guess, a story we tell ourselves because the alternative that the truth is simply gone is too unbearable to accept. More than a century has passed since that June night, and the Villisca case remains officially unsolved. The house still stands at 508 East 2nd Street. It has been carefully restored to look exactly as it did in 1912. The same wallpaper, the same furniture, the same narrow staircase leading up to the rooms where the Moore children slept. Visitors come from across the country. Some come for history, some come for curiosity, and some come for something else because over the decades, that house has become known for more than just a criminal case. People who have spent time inside its walls describe experiences they cannot explain. The sound of children's voices in empty rooms, shadows that move when nothing is casting them, a heaviness in the air that some describe as grief and others describe as something darker. Investigators who have spent the night inside have reported waking suddenly in the early hours of the morning with the overwhelming feeling that someone was standing directly over them in the dark. One researcher packed his equipment and left before 3 a.m. and refused to ever return. Whether you believe in the supernatural, or whether you believe that the human mind simply cannot process that much tragedy without creating its own shadows, something lives in that house, something that has never left. But here's the detail that matters more than any ghost story. Here's the thing that true crime researchers keep coming back to, the thing that refuses to let this case rest. Whoever committed the Villisca murders did not leave immediately after. Based on the evidence in that kitchen, the food, the lamp, the bowl of water, it appears that the killer stayed inside that house for a significant period of time after the murders were complete. They moved through the dark rooms. They washed up. They may have eaten something. They arranged the bodies. They covered the mirrors. And then at some point, in the quiet hours before dawn, they walked out of that house and disappeared. Not running, not panicking, walking, because they were not afraid, because they were in control, because they knew with a certainty that should disturb every single person listening to this, that no one was coming. That is the terror of Villisca. Not just what happened, but who was calm enough to do it, and who was calculated enough to get away with it completely. The Moore children are buried in the local cemetery. Their headstones still stand in a row. People leave flowers. Visitors leave small toys near the smaller graves. The town of Villisca has carried this wound for over 100 years, and it is never fully healed, because a wound cannot heal when there is no justice, when there is no answer, when the person responsible never faced a single consequence for what they did to that family, to those children on that quiet summer night in Iowa. Josiah Moore trusted his town. Sarah Moore trusted her neighbors. And two little girls named Lena and Ina Stillinger trusted that a sleepover at a friend's house was the most normal, most innocent thing in the world. None of them were wrong to trust. And that is perhaps the most haunting truth of all. The house on East 2nd Street is still accepting visitors. You can book a night. You can sleep in those rooms. You can lie in that darkness in the same space where those children close their eyes for the very last time and ask yourself the question, that has gone unanswered for over a century. Who walked into that house? Who moved through those rooms? Who picked up that axe and made a decision 8 separate times that ended a life? Was it George Kelly, the unstable minister who confessed and then recanted? Was it a hired killer sent by a bitter businessman who felt betrayed? Was it a traveling predator moving through the Midwest, leaving silence behind him in town after town? Or was it someone who has never once appeared in any investigation, someone hiding in plain sight, in the very town where the Moores lived and trusted and built their lives? And here's my final question for you. The one I want you to sit with after this video ends. After everything you now know about this case, the covered mirrors, the bloody water, the killer who stayed, the confessions that went nowhere, the suspects who walked free, who do you believe did this? Because 8 people deserve an answer, and maybe, just maybe, the truth is still out there, waiting for the right person to finally wake it up. Leave your answer in the comments below. This case has waited over 100 years. It can wait a little longer, but it will not wait forever.